So this is the last session of the day, and I'll have my panelists come out and join me now if they are ready to do so. But while they're joining me, I just want to give you a little background. You guys have heard me speak a couple of times this week. But this panel is specifically about the feedback and the information that we've heard from everyone. And that is that when a QSA walks into an organization, perfect timing. So when a QSA walks into an organization that has an internal security assessor and ISA on staff, they are so relieved because they understand that they're going to be able to speak the same language as the ISA. Things go so much smoother, they're more efficient, they're more effective, and this is how we bridge the gap and speak the same language as our assessors. And so now I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Clewis, and I'm the CEO of Genesis Security and Compliance, where we help companies deploy and manage full-on PCI compliance teams. Before becoming the CEO, I was the security architect at American Airlines, an ISA, and a QSA for several years. And I'm super excited to be here to share with you guys today.
And I'm excited as well. I'm Phyllis Woodruff, and I'm VP of IT Risk and Compliance for Global Payments. I've been in that role for 3 years, but I've had about 20 years in the payments industry. 17 years of that was with Fiserv, so I've gone from one issuer acquirer to another, and it is a fascinating world. I've been an ISA for longer than I will share, but have enjoyed every minute of it.
Hi, it's an honor to be here. My name is Richard Haag. I'm Vice President of Compliance for Intersec Worldwide. We are a PCI, QSA, and forensics company. For the last 17 years, I have led PCI assessment teams for some of the largest, PCI assessments, excuse me, for some of the largest processors and merchants, as well as fintech startups.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brittany George. I'm a partner in IT advisory and the technology industry leader at Weaver. We're a public accounting firm. I've been there for 15 years this year. It's hard to believe, but I've always been in IT my entire career, and I do everything from PCI assessments, SOCs, SOCs, and other security compliance assessments.
Okay, so to kick off the session, I'm going to ask the QSAs. Can you share with the audience what and how organizations having an ISA on staff has just made your life easier? Rich, I'm actually going to start with you. We go really way back. You were our assessor at a company I used to work for, so
that's right.
Interested to hear your...
I had hair back then, so I'd say there's two main areas that make it easier for us. One is scoping, and the other is evidence request and documentation requests. As far as scoping goes, there's a lot of nuances with the card data environment, connected to. We don't have to spend a lot of time if they have an ISA on staff going over what scope is and what we're after to set the foundation for the assessment. The other is documentation requests. I can't tell you how many times that, unfortunately, clients have misunderstood what we're asking for. If we're asking for a penetration test, we get a vulnerability scan. Or it's something simple, like we just ask for a network diagram and we get one from 5 years ago. And, sometimes if it's only off by a year, we might miss it and then catch it in QA, and it sets the whole assessment back.
And I'll just say strictly from the QSA perspective, it's really just having a point of contact that truly understands the purpose and the nuance of the assessment as it pertains to PCI specifically.
And Brittany and Rich, I agree with y'all both. From my unique experience, I've noticed that there is a very noticeable difference between companies that have ISAs and the ones that don't. For example, ISAs made my role as a QSA much more simpler and the assessment run smoother, faster, and reducing the cost. So ISAs would ensure that the internal team members not only understood the PCI DSS compliance framework, but their specific role as it related to compliance, which is critical, as well as documentation and evidence creation. Having it available ahead of schedule before the QSA would even arrive has been something that has been truly helpful. And the last part that I really enjoyed about having ISAs internally was that ISAs becoming the champions of the organization to be able to leverage their knowledge of the standard to get organizational support to drive initiatives instead of looking at PCI like it's a project.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So now I'm going to talk to our ISAs or recovering ISAs. What has been your experience working with the assessor that the audience would be benefited by knowing?
If I go back to Jamie's presentation this morning, I got a real chuckle out of the point where he was listening to his IT team and there was no communication between them. And being an ISA, having ISAs on staff, truly, it does bridge that gap. The title of this was perfect because all of a sudden you have someone who can translate. And they're not only translating in preparation for an assessment, they're also translating throughout the year. When you embed an ISA in any of your technical teams, all of a sudden you've shifted everything to the left. You have someone to catch things as they're being created rather than trying to patch them and make do at the end. It makes a tremendous difference. And you end up with well-educated teams.
Indeed.
Definitely, definitely. I love that part about that you mentioned about integrating them, especially with the technical teams, because one of the things that I try to share is like from an ISA perspective, like it's not your job to tell the company no. Like if they come with an initiative for them to be able to push the boundaries, create new service and product offerings, but how can we do this in a secure and compliant fashion? But if we're not having the conversation, we'll never get there. So ISAs are great for that, as well as reducing the cost and making assessments extremely cost effective. Because what I've noticed in my career is that sometimes remediation costs extend the timeline of assessments and the cost. And having a team of ISAs or just an individual ISA that could bridge that gap to translate the controls significantly reduce the cost.
The other thing about that, of course, is that as a QSA going in, you don't know everything. You see so many environments throughout the year. And the ISA knows what words to use to give you that grounding to say, this is what you're actually looking at. And that can be huge as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would also add that, ISAs help keep your QSAs honest. As a QSA, we're often handling 2 or 3 assessments at the same time. It's easy for us to confuse some facts. And, I've certainly had situations where I see something, it's like, oh my God, this is a disaster. And they're like, no, it's not in scope. And it's like, they kind of steer you back and you don't end up wasting a lot of time on a potential threat that isn't, so.
I was actually talking to some of our QSA and ISA friends, obviously, here at the conference, and some of the feedback they gave me, and me as a QSA, I don't do the ISA part, but they said just providing that consistency and continuity, your QSA may have turnover.
Right.
As people grow in their careers, they move on, they move to different engagements, different organizations, and the ISA serves at that solid point that will always, should always be there, hopefully, right, if it's a great company. And then also kind of to what you were saying, Rich, just providing that insight, that knowledge, and really understanding the scope of what's going on within the organization.
That's awesome to know. So, okay, it's all about PCI DSS4 right now. And that, what I've understood from you all is that brings a lot of value to that role as an ISA. Can you share your thoughts on how ISA training for version 4.0 can benefit the transition?
Oh, tremendously. Again, it's about moving compliance to the left. And we at Global Payments have been working with 4.0 really since the first publication and providing responses to the SSC and so on. But we've also included the ISAs in that so that they can go out, so that they can look at their builds, they can look at the platforms that they are a part of and understand where there are going to be gaps. Mm-hmm. With 4.0, it's not just a matter of flipping a switch, right? You have to understand where your problems are, and you have to probably take it at least through one full budget cycle, if not more. Our organizations have board members to report to. They have shareholders to report to. And we can't have that sudden allocation of funds. It has to be planned for.
Yeah.
Speaking of planning, that's something that I've encouraged our clients to do that have their internal teams, because 4.0 brings its set of unique challenges, and it's going to be extremely difficult for someone that doesn't have the experience or the knowledge to read, especially the requirements that have changed, to apply to the organization. Because the last thing a company wants to do is find out about a new requirement and the evidence when the assessment starts with the QSA. And so what we've been recommending is our clients use the ISAs to initiate a gap analysis so they can identify those areas of growth opportunities, is what I call them, as quickly as possible so the budget can be allocated to address those issues.
Yeah, I agree with Phyllis and Boyd. I'd also add that, PCI 4.0 has this new concept of a custom approach, which, QSAs have been instructed, look, you're not supposed to provide any sort of guidance or anything to an organization and to maintain or eliminate a conflict of interest. And so I think it's going to be critical for those organizations that want to take that approach, have their own ISAs that have been trained as a QSA, and understand what the objective of the standard is.
Yeah, and with any transition to a new version within PCI or updates to really any standard or framework, an organization definitely benefits by having an expert on staff, kind of like we were just talking about, who understands all of those intricacies of the changes. And so you understand what they mean, how they apply to your environment, how to best implement them or approach them, and then the urgency from a timing perspective and even a cost perspective. And so along with your external QSA, you almost assure a smooth transition from the prior version to the new version.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I'm not sure that most leaders understand that the training that the ISA goes through is the similar training that the QSA goes through. So why would you not arm yourself with someone on your team that is trained, that can translate the controls, tell you exactly what you need to do to prepare for the big bad QSA?
Well, and to be there for the teams, right? To give them that guidance. They don't have to bare their soul in front of the QSA.
Right.
They can do it in front of the ISA. We're much kinder and gentler.
This is true.
That's awesome. Okay, Brittany, I'm going to come back to you, and we're going to end the conversation with this. Like, what's one key takeaway that you'd like to share with the audience to solidify the benefits of speaking the same language?
So when an organization has an ISA on staff, the understanding of the expectations and the ability to work through solutions is just greatly enhanced. You're truly speaking the same language because the baseline training, like you said, and the focus on cardholder data stays the focus. It's more than just a security focus or best practices. It's the security wrapped in the PCI requirements. And so scoping discussions tend to be more targeted and fruitful, and you generally recognize efficiencies when you're in meetings and walkthroughs and even in the field work and the testing, and that's more greatly realized. Instead of the QSA acting as the liaison between PCI, the requirements, and security, the security team, and then the environment, the ISA can really take on that role. And at the end of the day, that can also help with fees to some extent, like you said. So we typically have a point of contact within the organization whenever we're performing an assessment. But having somebody specifically trained and skilled in the subject matter turns out to be a big win for everybody.
Yeah, I would concur with Brittany, as well as I would add that, having an ISA also gives you flexibility to both the organization and the QSA. I remember when COVID hit, travel was shut down. We could not go on site to assess physical standards or do any interviews. And so we relied heavily on our ISAs to at least do the physical assessments that are required under Requirement 9 and provide us greater assurance, and my QA team greater assurance, that it was done appropriately and as trained as a QSA.
Yeah. And I would have to say that Global Payments as an organization leverages ISAs heavily and to great effect. They are a cost savings. They are a time saver, right? They work with the teams in order to collect information ahead of an assessment I think one of us talked about the fact of shortening the time frame of the assessment, which is only good because it not only saves us on QSA costs, it also is going to drive down audit fatigue. You want this to be second nature for the teams. You want it to be business as usual. So you need trained individuals who can help with that. They bring a tremendous amount of value to us. Then there's also the whole shift left thing, where when a development is going on, if we can catch something in the early stages, if we don't have to do rework further down the line before release, we get to market faster and we have saved our company an enormous amount of money. So there's a real value proposition to the ISA training and to maintaining it.
Yes.
Definitely, I agree. My biggest takeaway would be for companies, leaders in positions to make the investment in the training. Because as an executive, it's my job to make sure that my employees have the right tools and resources they need to accomplish their jobs efficiently. And what I've seen in my career is that people have been given the responsibility of PCI without the proper training or authority to make things happen. And it leads to audit fatigue, as you mentioned, Phyllis, as well as burnout. So you have people actually leaving the company. A simple investment could actually put you in the position to shift the culture where PCI is not viewed as a project, but it becomes business as usual. But that starts at the top with the investment to ensure that your team has the right resources and the right training, and it will be a complete game changer.
And you should reap the rewards from that investment throughout the assessment and throughout the year.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Years.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that. I want to say my takeaway that I'd love everybody to know is that, not only speaking the same language as your QSA for PCI DSS, we have knowledge training. So if you have, say, point-to-point encryption or SSF or PIN in your environment, we have knowledge training. While it doesn't result in an ISA type certification, you can send your folks through those classes and sit with the actual assessors as they're going through those classes as well. And that way, you can speak the same language, and those assessments are going to go a lot faster and be a lot more efficient because they're going to know what's going to be looked for when that assessor steps on site. And if there's anything that I've learned this week is when you speak the same language, things can happen easier, they can be quicker, and the relationships that you build with your PCI assessors in whatever standard that or program that might be becomes even more solid with that understanding. So we want to thank you all for joining me on stage here. I was very excited about this session. And then use the app to connect with these folks if you haven't already. And for most of you, I'm sure we're going to see you in the assessor session later on. So thank you.